Omar Khayyam, he's one of those figures, right? You hear the name, you think Rubaiyat, those verses, those images, life, death, seizing the day.
It's funny though, because for all the familiarity of those poems, most people, I think, don't realize Khayyam. He was so much more than just a poet. This guy, back in 11th century Persia, he was a big deal mathematician, astronomer.
A true polymath, as they say. And that's where this deep dive gets really interesting. We've got these source materials, and they're making these connections between his famous quatrains, those 4-line verses, and his work on calendars, his breakthroughs in algebra. They even get into his thinking about, well, reality itself.
Yeah. It's like there are layers to this stuff. Like his thing with wine. Right. Everybody knows he wrote about wine. But this edition of the Rubaiyat, it suggests that wasn't just about enjoying a good drink, For Khayyam, wine was symbolic. It was about breaking free of dogma, embracing how fleeting life really is.
And you can't forget that whole story, I mean, it's practically legend, about the discovery of wine, at least according to this source, right? This exiled woman from the Shah's harem, she's on the verge of, ending it all, so she drinks what she thinks is poison, a jar of spoiled grapes, and bam! Turns out it's fermented, and suddenly the world's got wine.
It's such a great example of how Khayyam blended science and storytelling. He used those elements to get at these profound ideas. And that's what's so wild about the connection this edition draws to quantum physics. They actually call the quantum field Khayyam's quicksilver.
Quicksilver, that's such a striking image. But for those of us who maybe haven't cracked open a physics textbook lately, what does that even mean in this context?
Think of it like this. Imagine this ever-shifting, always moving force that's behind everything in the universe, like some kind of invisible fabric made of pure energy and potential. That's the quantum field. And it's interacting with itself constantly, creating these particles that pop in and out of being, shaping what we experience as reality. That's Khayyam's quicksilver, constantly in motion, always changing, but always there.
So we're talking about this dynamic force underpinning everything, and there's actually a quatrain of Khayyam's that this source points to, where he describes something that runs quicksilver-like through all of creation, taking on different forms, but never really changing at its core.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Here's Khayyam, centuries ago, almost like he's getting these glimpses of something we're only now beginning to grasp with quantum physics.
Yeah.
Expressing it through his poetry, no less.
It's really mind-bending when you start to see those kinds of connections, across centuries like that.
It really is.
And speaking of connections, there's this really interesting concept this source brings up. It's called the Omarian Day.
Oh, right?
Have you heard of this?
I have.
So what they're suggesting is that we think about the Rubaiyat as a whole as like a representation of a single day.
Yes.
From sunrise to when the moon comes up.
Yes.
Mirroring like a human life.
Precisely.
So each quatrain, is it like a moment within that day then?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way to think about it.
And the whole poem becomes this kind of journey, from birth to death.
Yeah. And this idea, the Omarian Day, it's poetic on its own, but then it also it connects back to what we know about Khayyam and his fascination with time.
Oh,
and it's drawn
the calendars.
Exactly. This is the guy who created this incredibly accurate calendar. I mean, even accounting for leap years. It's remarkable.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how he really thought about time, Was this like a straight line for him? Or was there this cyclical aspect to it? Like this whole Omarian Day idea suggests.
Right. Are we talking linear time or something more circular? It really makes you think.
Yeah.
But that idea of cycles, it resonates with what we were talking about earlier, with the quantum stuff.
Oh, totally. Like those particles constantly being created and destroyed.
Exactly. It's like its own kind of endless cycle, but happening on this tiny, tiny scale. It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is, but then this Omarian day concept, it brings it back down to earth a bit.
It does.
Because it's like, okay, the sun rises, the sun sets, the seasons change.
Right.
We experience those cycles in our own lives too, you know? Growth, decay, starting over.
Absolutely. And this edition of the Rubaiyat, it actually includes a quote from Edward Fitzgerald, the guy who translated it.
Okay.
And he talks about how the poem itself, it moves through these different phases, just like a day.
Interesting.
Starting with this contemplative dawn, then getting like kind of wild, even he uses the word blasphemous as the day goes on.
Wow.
And then finally settling into this melancholic dusk.
Oh.
I mean, it's like he saw the whole human experience reflected in the arc of a single day.
Mm-hmm. It makes you think, if you only had one Omarian day, you know, one perfect day to represent your entire life, how would you even begin to spend that time?
It's a powerful question, and I think whether we realize it or not, we're all living our own Omarian day, you know, each moment adding up to this larger story.
That's a really good way to put it.
And that leads into another big theme that this source really dives into: death.
Right. I mean, the Rubaiyat, it doesn't shy away from that at all.
Not at all.
But it's interesting because even though it's dealing with these heavy topics, there's also this sense of hopefulness to it, this idea that everything's connected.
Absolutely. And this edition, it brings in that concept that's actually become pretty popular in like science circles these days.
You're talking about the whole "we're all made of stardust" thing.
Yeah.
Which, when you actually stop and think about it, it is kind of mind-blowing.
It's
That the atoms that make us, they were forged in the heart of stars billions of years ago.
billions of years ago.
It's incredible.
It really is. And this edition actually points to a specific quatrain from Khayyam where he writes about this, how our atoms are slowly grown in the stars.
Wow, so he was onto something back then.
It seems like it, right? Like intuitively, he understood something about the universe that science is only now confirming.
It really is amazing to consider that, you know?
Yeah.
That we're walking around with pieces of those ancient stars inside us.
It is, and you know, it all circles back to that idea of interconnectedness, right?
Mhm.
And for Khayyam, that wasn't just some poetic notion. It was like fundamental to how he understood the world, especially through math.
Right, because this edition, it doesn't just focus on the Rubaiyat, it gets into his mathematical work too.
And that's where it gets really cool, because you start to see how his mathematical thinking and his philosophical ideas, they were all intertwined for him. Math wasn't just about like numbers and equations. It was a language, a way to make sense of the universe, find those hidden patterns, those connections that point to a deeper order to things.
So he was using math to explore these big questions about existence, just like he was using poetry.
Exactly. Like this source, it talks about his work on dividing a quadrant of a circle and also his studies in algebra.
Okay.
And believe it or not, these explorations, they actually foreshadowed later discoveries in geometry and even calculus. Pretty amazing.
Wow, so he was ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
He really was. But the thing is, he wasn't just some ivory tower intellectual.
Right.
You know, he saw the practical applications of this stuff too, like in his work on calendars.
Right, we talked about the Jalali calendar earlier, the one he created that was even more accurate than the Gregorian calendar we use today.
Exactly, which just shows, I mean, this guy was brilliant, but he also cared about creating something useful, something that could benefit society.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about gazing at the stars, it was about understanding our place among them, you know, marking time, finding order within this vastness.
I think that's what's been so fascinating about this whole deep dive. Omar Khayyam, he wasn't just a poet or a mathematician or an astronomer, he was all of those things at once.
Absolutely.
Driven by this incredible curiosity about the universe and this like deep desire to understand how it all works.
Yeah, he really embodies that idea that all knowledge is connected.
Hmm.
You know, that these different fields, they're not really separate at all. They're just different ways of looking at the same underlying reality.
Which brings us back to that really thought-provoking idea this source has been exploring, that maybe embracing this quantum view of reality, it could actually be a more satisfying way to approach the big questions than, like, traditional religion.
It's definitely a bold statement.
It is.
But I think what they're getting at is that, you know, a lot of traditional religions, they rely on dogma, on faith, which is fine.
Right.
But quantum physics, as weird and complicated as it can be, it offers this understanding of the cosmos that's grounded in, like, evidence. It's based on observation and experimentation,
Yeah.
which in a way is even more awe-inspiring, don't you think?
I do, because it's like, this is how the universe actually works, and the more we discover, the more amazing it gets.
Exactly. And it's not about, like, throwing out spirituality altogether. It's more about finding a different kind of spirituality, one that's rooted in this sense of wonder and mystery that the universe itself reveals to us through science.
So instead of looking outside ourselves for answers, it's about looking inward and outward at the same time, recognizing that we're part of this incredible cosmic dance.
Precisely. We're these tiny specks of stardust, but we're also integral parts of this vast interconnected web of being, and that's something worth celebrating.
It really is. Well, on that note, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought. If our atoms were once part of stars, and those stars were born from the universe itself, what does that say about our place in this grand cosmic scheme of things? What does it mean to live in a quantum universe where the very fabric of reality shimmers with possibility? And how might embracing this perspective change the way we live our lives, the way we love, the way we find meaning in the face of the unknown?